I had already said yes once. I said it with a trembling voice, a shaky hand, and a heart full of that naive certainty that only youth can sustain. I said it believing that love was enough, that loving someone was all it took for everything to work out. And for a while, it almost did. We were happy, as if the world had been made just for the two of us. But life, that teacher who doesn't warn you when she's about to test you, put us through trials we didn't even know existed. There came silent demands, noisy silences, days dragged out between half-spoken words and others swallowed by pride. And then, without a fight, without a scene, just with a mutual bitter exhaustion, we said goodbye. We signed papers, divided belongings, emptied drawers, and swallowed everything that didn't fit into boxes. And so, what was meant to be forever became the past. But not just any past. It was a past that throbbed, that lingered, tucked away in the corners of memory, resurfacing now and then in smells, songs, inside jokes no one else would understand. I moved on, as all of us do. I did what's expected of a wounded but strong woman. I rebuilt my life. I went forward. But if I'm being honest, brutally honest, there wasn't a single day when his name didn't echo, even briefly somewhere, in my thoughts. There was never a love after hours that didn't, on some level, carry the weight of a silent comparison. Because when you've truly belonged to someone, everything else feels a little out of place. And that's why years later, when I saw him again, something inside me froze. Not out of fear, not out of pain, but out of that raw, inevitable realization that love, the real kind, doesn't fade. It just learns to wait. I wasn't expecting to see him. In fact, I was certain our paths would never cross again. And that was a comforting certainty, the illusion I needed to keep my wounds stitched shut. But there he was, standing across the room with that same presence that never needed to be forced. His shoulders a little more slumped, his eyes marked by wrinkles that weren't there before. And yet, it was him. As if time had made a point of preserving exactly what I could never forget. I stood frozen for a few seconds, and in that moment the world seemed to slow down. I felt my breath falter, my heart beating louder than I wanted, and an uncomfortable warmth rising in my chest. I thought about leaving, about pretending I hadn't seen him. But my feet didn't move, and neither did he. He just looked at me, as if he too wasn't prepared but still understood in that same instant that something inevitable was about to happen. When we approached each other, it was awkward, too polite. He said hi as if he were saying sorry. I replied as if holding a full glass, afraid to spill. We talked about trivial things first, weather, work, mutual acquaintances. But all it took was a comma, a pause in the middle of a sentence, for the silence to reveal what really lingered between us, what had never gone away. I pretended to be resolved. He pretended he was just happy to see me. But inside, I knew, and he knew. That exchange of glances wasn't nostalgia. For an old friend, it was a reunion with something interrupted. I smiled the whole time, using politeness as armor. And he respected that. He didn't push anything. He just said goodbye, with a light touch on my arm, and that old look that said more than any long conversation. If you want, I'm still here. I went home that night with my whole body tense. I lay down, unable to relax. The ceiling seemed whiter than ever. And in the darkness of my room, I heard my own voice, almost a whisper, say his name, out loud for the first time in years, just to make sure it still hurt. And it did. But not like before. It hurt differently. It hurt like hope. In the days that followed, everything seemed the same on the outside. But inside, something had shifted, as if a forgotten drawer inside me had been opened, and I was dealing with the old scent of things I never had the courage to throw away. I went on with my routine, as always, work, grocery shopping, silence when I got home. But between one task and another, he crept into my thoughts, a gesture I remembered, a word he used to say, a song that, without warning, exploded inside the car. I tried not to romanticize it. I repeated to myself everything that went wrong, everything that hurt us, everything that drove us apart. But no matter how much I tried to convince my reason, something deeper took over. The feeling that there was still something between us that hadn't been lived to its end. It wasn't longing for what we were. It was a desire for what we could have been and maybe still could be. We met again by chance, or by what fate likes to pretend is chance. It was at a simple community event, and he was more at ease, with a light expression on his face. We talked more freely this time. The defenses weren't so high anymore. He joked about time and how we'd aged, and for the first time in years, I laughed with him, a real laugh, the kind that comes with memory and acceptance at the same time. He asked how I was, not in the automatic tone of someone expecting, "I'm fine" as an answer, but with that inflection of someone who really wants to know. And I answered as best I could, with contained honesty, but no lies. He did the same. We didn't talk about what happened between us, not yet. But the space between us was no longer uncomfortable. It was charged with something old, but now more mature. It was as if we were relearning each other without haste, without promises. That night, lying in my bed, I felt something had changed definitively. Not in him, in me. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid to remember. I wasn't afraid to feel. And I understood that the past no longer held me back. It was just preparing me to look again, but with different eyes, with more truth, and with so much more self-love. That's how something new began, not from scratch, but from where we'd left off, with the courage we lacked before. Life started to feel full of pauses, the kind no one sees, but you feel in the middle of the day, like when you pick up your phone to reply to a message and realize, deep down, you're just waiting for one that hasn't come yet. It was during this phase that he reappeared more often, not excessively, always at the right time, always respecting my space. He'd send a simple message, comment on something he saw that reminded him of me, like someone testing the waters, temperature before diving in, and I'd reply. Not with forced enthusiasm, but with that care of someone still learning to trust, not in him, but in herself. The curious thing is that he wasn't trying to prove anything. He didn't make promises. He didn't come with redemption speeches. He was just there. And that being there, calm, steady, different from what we were before, gave me a peace I didn't know I could still feel with him. Our first coffee happened without planning. It was a shy invitation on a rainy late afternoon, and I accepted, without overthinking. I sat across from him and noticed our faces had changed. We were no longer young, trying to fit into expectations that weren't even ours. Now we were two adults, marked, but whole. The conversation flowed like opening a window after a long time. We didn't avoid the past, but we didn't dive into it right away either. There was care, there was respect. He looked into my eyes, like someone who knew what he'd lost, but more than that, like someone willing to rebuild, even from scratch. And I, for the first time, listened with a clean heart, not expecting justifications, just listening. And there, in the middle of the conversation, something hit me hard. I still loved him, but it wasn't a love of memory, of longing for what was. It was a current, possible love, calmer, less fanciful. A love that knew its limits, but still chose to stay. In the days that followed, we grew closer with more courage. There was still hesitation in our gestures, our invitations, the words spoken with more space between them. but it was a beautiful kind of care. The kind of respect that comes from someone who's seen the other bleed and still wants to try again. He asked how I was sleeping, if I was eating well, if I still wrote in the notebooks that always went with me. Small questions, but they touched parts of me no one else remembered to reach. And little by little, I lowered my walls. Not because he asked, but because, for the first time, I felt safe enough to do it by my own choice. And it was on an ordinary afternoon, sitting side by side, talking about life like someone stitching together patches of silence, that he looked at me with those calm eyes from before and said, "I still think of you as my home." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because in that moment my heart answered for me with a full silence. And there, between the unspoken and what was already obvious, I started to understand. Maybe we didn't work before because we needed to lose each other to understand the value of staying. The reapproach followed an almost organic rhythm, as if our bodies knew what to do even when our minds still stumbled over memories. There were no grand declarations or cinematic speeches. It was all slow, everyday, intimate. He started coming by the house with discreet excuses, returning a book I didn't even remember was mine, asking if I still made that lemon cake he always praised. And I pretended to believe the excuses, not out of naivety, but because there was something sweet in seeing how he tried not to scare the space he was reclaiming. It was as if, this time, he knew that loving me wasn't enough. He needed to care for me too. As the meetings became more frequent, the inevitable came. We started touching on the past, not with resentment, but with a maturity we lacked back then. We talked about the long fights, the poisonous silences, the way each of us expected to be understood without saying a word. I admitted things I'd never said, that I often stayed silent out of fear of seeming weak, that I didn't ask for help when I was falling apart, that I thought his love would be enough to heal me, and he, with his eyes lowered, confessed that he ran when he should have stayed, that he confused pride with strength, that he thought losing me was unlikely, until it happened. The words washed over us like warm rain. They didn't hurt, they cleansed. But still, not everything was simple. One night he took me to dinner, a simple place, with yellowish light and the smell of fresh bread. We sat side by side, and between one bite and another, he looked at me with a tenderness that undid me. He said he loved me, just like that, with all the letters, no beating around the bush. And I, in silence, felt my whole body react. But I didn't say me too, not in that moment, not for lack of love, but because I felt a weight in my chest, not of doubt, but of fear. Fear of saying yes again and failing. Fear of opening the doors of a house that took years to rebuild, only to see it crumble again. And he noticed. He didn't push. He just held my hand firmly and said, "I'm not rushing you. I'm just here, and I'll keep being here." It was in that moment that I understood that love that grows slowly is the one with the best chance of lasting, because it doesn't impose, it offers. He didn't want my yes that night. He wanted my truth, and that he already had. Our reunion didn't have exact milestones, but I knew something was changing when my doubts started to quiet down. Not by magic, not because he swore eternal love, but because, over time, he stayed. Not like before, when staying was part of the routine, but now, staying was a choice. Being with me was a choice. And I felt that in the simplest gestures. He listened with presence. He remembered my silences. He knew when to speak and when to just touch my hand. There was a new gentleness in our love, as if he knew he wasn't dealing with the same woman from before. And he respected that. I was no longer the wife trying to save the relationship alone, smiling through exhaustion. Now I wanted more than to love. I wanted to be loved with truth. And he seemed to understand, that with a maturity that moved me even in the smallest gestures. It was on a Sunday afternoon that everything became clearer. We were walking with no set destination, talking little. The kind of silence that doesn't weigh, it just accompanies. We passed by an old park, one of those that holds the sounds of the past, and sat on a wooden bench worn by time. The same bench where, years before, he used to scribble dreams in a black-covered notebook. Dreams that, out of insecurity or fear, he let slip through his fingers. He was quiet, his eyes lost among the tall leaves. I knew something was coming. I felt it in the air, in the way he breathed deeper. And then after a few long seconds, he said my name like someone putting everything they are into the sound of a single word. Marianne. And I looked. He turned to me, unhurried, and spoke with a firm but low voice, as if confessing a secret. I know we didn't work before. But now we've grown. And if you want to walk with me again, this time I promise not to let go of your hand. That pierced me. Because it wasn't a rehearsed request. It wasn't an attempt to erase the past. It was the offer of a clean present. And there, sitting next to the man who once made me cry from pain, and who now looked at me with such humility, I understood. True love isn't the kind that never fails. It's the kind that has the courage to try again, with more awareness and less pride. I looked at him, not in a rush, not with doubt, just with the certainty that time had taught me to feel in my body. And then, without hiding the emotion, I said, yes, but not to what we were, yes to what we are now. And he smiled. That calm, grateful smile, like someone receiving something they'd waited for in silence for too long. In that moment, nothing was spectacular. No grand gesture, no crowd. But inside me, something settled. It was love saying, now it's time. We started slowly. Not out of the insecurity from before, but because now we knew the value of time. The reunions stopped being a novelty and became routine, a light, mature routine without the weight of unattainable expectations. We learned not to romanticize everything. We knew that love doesn't fix anyone, and that the feeling alone wasn't enough if there wasn't a mutual choice every day. And that's exactly why it worked this time, because we were no longer two young people trying to fit into each other's worlds. We were two adults willing to create a new world, built from what we learned from the falls, the absences, the silence life imposed between us. He didn't come back trying to save me, and I didn't come back trying to be enough for him. We were at last side by side, whole, complete, without the need to fill gaps, but with a sincere desire to add to each other. There was room for flaws, for apologies, for the tough conversations we used to put off. And even more beautiful, there was humor. We laughed a lot. We laughed at who we were, at who we tried to be, at the silly mistakes and the fights that no longer made sense. Sometimes he'd look at me out of nowhere and say, "You're still beautiful when you're mad." And I'd reply, "And you still irritate me like no one else." And we'd laugh, because now, even what once pushed us apart brought us closer. The difference? We didn't want to win against each other. We just wanted to be together. People around us were surprised at first. Some asked if we were sure. Others doubted, as if the past was proof enough that we couldn't make it. But we knew. We knew because this time, love wasn't noise. It was a silence that calmed. It was being together without having to explain everything. It was peace, not urgency. It was looking at him on any given afternoon while he folded a shirt with care and thinking, this is it. Love won. Not because it was easy, but because we chose to grow. And we came back to each other not to repeat, but to rebuild with more truce. On the day we made our return official, with a simple dinner and eyes brighter than the first time, he held my hand, looked deep into me and said, "Marianne Elridge, would you say yes again?" I smiled with a light heart, and I answered with the confidence of someone who no longer needed to imagine the future, because I was already living it. Yes. And this time, it's to live fully. Today, we're not the same as before, and thank God for that. We're calmer, more whole, more aware of what hurts and what heals. We live a simple routine, made of comfortable silences, shared coffees, and hands that seek each other without urgency. He no longer tries to guess what I'm thinking, he asks. And I no longer expect him to fill my gaps. I complete myself. We've learned to love with more calm, to fight with more care, and to return to each other without pride. The yes I gave the second time wasn't an answer to a request. It was a recognition. Love didn't go away. It just matured. And today, it lives here, within us, every day.